So we have a set of constraints. We know what is a not null constraint, where you cannot allow null values into it. Unique constraint, which has to be distinct values. Now moving on to the primary key. If I have got uh, multiple columns with unique values. For example, student register number is unique as well as the other number of every student is unique. But then I would like to uh, take in one unique column as the primary referential information. For student database, we'll always go ahead with the register number. Fine. If you're paying an income tax, you always go ahead with the PAN number. So there are certain unique columns. There can be more than one unique columns in a table, but for our information, for our referring, we take one unique column as the main attribute for referring entire data. So among the whole university process, you'll be considering only the register number as your important attribute to how you can refer to other details of a particular student. So that column you call it as a primary key. Now, for example, as I have told you and discussed in the class, in your student detail, you have the primary key as an register number. Similarly, every faculty will have an faculty ID and their details would be in another table as table B, faculty details. Now, when a student takes a particular faculty for a particular course, you will have the faculty ID alone in the student table. So you will have a faculty ID which acts as the primary key in the faculty table. But in the student table, from student table, you can refer to the faculty table by using the faculty ID as a key. That key you call it as a foreign key, and then you go ahead with the check constraints. Maybe you don't allow certain values to be entered, and so on and so forth. You can go ahead with enforce the check constraint. Now, normally Oracle generates by using, you don't name the constraint, Oracle itself tries to generate, or the system itself tries to generate the constraint by using sys underscore the constraint format, C with some name format in it. And now these can be either created, these constraints can be created while the table is being created, or else you can always add constraint to a table by using the alter option. So now you have different constraints which we can add. You have created a table. So we'll do and create table name employee is created. The first one is employee ID. You have a data type for it, first name, job ID, so on. Now for job ID, what I have done, I have just given not null. I haven't named the constraint for the job ID. I have just enforced not null to be here. So what does this mean? When this part is executed, as per our previous statement, system generates a constraint name to it, which starts with SYS. And whereas when it comes to the next part, you define and constraint. Constraint is a keyword. Now I am giving a name to the constraint, employee ID with then a primary key, which means I am considering primary key, I am setting employee ID to be the primary key. So how does it work? Constraint name, the name what you give, and then what kind of constraint are we giving? Is it a primary key or an not null key or an unique key? And then you move on to which column do you choose. So there are two ways of defining. The first one is you define by having the column name, the data type, and then the constraint. The second one is after you define all the columns and the data type, you specifically say constraint and then given constraint name to it, and then you say what constraint are you going to enforce, and you choose the column on which you are enforcing. So that is column, constraint name, and constraint type. Right, now you have a not null constraint. This is what we have said, you are supposed to ensure that you have values stored onto it. So you have not null as an information and you have constraint not null here. Now there are unique constraints and every email ID has to be unique. So what happens first time when I do an insertion? This is the already existing table, and first time I do an instruction saying 208 as the employee ID, the last name and the email, that is allowed because it is unique. Whereas when I try to enter it the next time if you see the employee ID is new, but then the name and the email ID is different. What have I done? I have given an unique constraint to the email. Since I'm using the old email ID, this insertion is not allowed while I insert the values. So, how do I do it? One second. How do I do it is you have the constraint name and you have it as unique as what we saw before. Now the same thing goes into an primary key. Primary key, when you insert it, certain things are not allowed, which means unique values has to be obtained. 50 cannot be allowed inside. The reason is 50 is already there department with which is tagged along with the shipping department. So that is not allowed. Then you have the foreign key. Now, foreign key, what can you use? Here you have the department with the department IDs, and then you have the employee. Employee have certain departments onto it. Now, if 90 is already there, they have few values, 90 will also be there. But then when I insert a new thing with 9, if 9, the value is not in your department ID, then this insertion will not happen, which means suppose you say you have student details which has been inserted and you tag along with some number. We'll take some random number as 10,000 as a faculty ID. And as soon as you enter these values, before these, the student detail gets reflected onto the student detail table, it checks whether you have a faculty within faculty ID 10,000. If the faculty exists, you will have the student record to be entered. If the faculty doesn't exist, you will not have that insertion to happen. Fine, that is all about it. You have foreign key as the name of it. So we have already told about defines the column in the child table that have the table level constraint. You know it happens with the references keyword. Now on delete, what happens? If I'm going to delete a faculty, anything pertaining to that faculty number has to be deleted in the student table. Fine. If the student is deleted, that doesn't get affected with the faculty table. Then you also have the check constraint. Now here what happens? You are doing an check constraint where you are setting up the salary should be greater than 0. So by mistake you cannot have a negative entry. Fine. So that is how it works out. Now this is the normal syntax. You have the constraint name and type. You can alter it. We already saw that how you will be altering it at the end. So you have alter table name. You are adding a constraint, so you add a constraint. Now what is the difference between naming a constraint and you allow the system to name a constraint? If I name the constraint, I know what constraint I am referring to. In case later on, if you want to drop that particular constraint, you will be able to drop it, or else you will not be able to do so easily. You have to track it, so on and so forth. So now here comes dropping the constraint. So what happens? Alter table name. You try to drop the constraint. You try to drop the primary key and so on. Fine. So this is where your DDL command is all about. So we'll stop here. uh, Till this you can go ahead with all the questions which are being posted onto your GCR. Ensure that it has been done.